Hello and welcome to this latest episode of the Oh No 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 podcast, which we are sitting down to record on Sunday evening. It is the 30th of November, which is St Andrew's Day. St Andrew, of course, being the patron saint of Scotland, despite having never set foot in this country. Born in Galilee, Andrew was martyred and crucified in Patra in Greece in the year 60 AD. And it was there that his body was preserved until the year 345, when a local monk named Regulus was visited in a dream by an angel, who warned him that the Emperor Constantine planned to steal Andrew's remains. The angel told Regulus to take these sacred relics and flee towards the very edges of the known world. And when Regulus was subsequently shipwrecked on the coast of Fife, he established a shrine that would grow to become St Andrew's Cathedral, laying the foundations for Andrew's national patronage. Just a little further down the coast this week, speculation ran wild as to what truly brought Dougie Imrie to Fife. Although the chief theories don't include divine intervention or the wayward waves of the North Sea, the new Rovers manager has been converting disciples of his own since his arrival, with his active engagement and passion bolstered greatly by yesterday's 1-0 win over Alloa in the Scottish Cup. I am Duncan Cameron, and joining me tonight are two of the Rovers' wisest apostles. It's Greg Brown, first of all. How are you, Greg?
Yeah, living the dream. Aye, doing really well, thanks.
Excellent. And we've got Robbie Weir as well. How are you, Robbie?
Yeah, I'm really good. I feel like it's the season for apologies at the moment. Obviously, apologies after voice notes and conjecture, and then there's the apologies for me to basically hallmark the whole of the last episode. Firmly put in my place, but I need to stop going on about it.
I was going to say, I like the idea that you're just going to have to do it every single week.
Yeah.
Although, to be fair, it gives you a real moral high ground every time we get beat from now on, which is...
I'm not going to hold that.
Fair play. Right, Greg, just to get us started today, neither you or I have been on last week since Dougie Imrie did arrive, and it was a bit of a kind of bolt from the blue. Was it Tuesday we get the rumour and Wednesday was appointed, or something like that?
Monday into Tuesday, I think, maybe.
You're right. Give me your overriding thoughts on Dougie Imrie's appointment.
Yeah, I think in the best sense it's just a really sensible appointment. I think when the news kind of broke on the Monday, I'm sure it was, it seemed to kind of come out of nowhere, and it was one of these names that the minute you heard it, you thought, right, okay, I can see the logic in that, even though it's not kind of who I envisaged would be lined up. But then, of course, you're comparing it with, you've got your Rhys McKay, but Paul Hanlon obviously would have been spoken to. The Courier then subsequently ran with the fact that David Gold had been spoken to, Chris Doolan, and you start to think, actually, and again, it's not this, oh, well, we might as well take Imrie. It actually seemed like I can see why the board have found that appealing. I think it's been widely talked about, and a lot of it is conjecture because we as fans, we're never going to know the brass tacks of the finances. But I mean, there's a lot that's been put to the positive for Imrie and the work he's done with Morton on supposedly the smallest budget in the division. And whether it is the smallest or not, he has, I think, had them punching above their weight for a wee while now. And I think that can only be a good thing for us. I think it was pretty succinctly put by Sean McGuigan on the terrace when he kind of said, and they were chatting about it, and he was saying, it's not about necessarily the Rovers becoming title contenders, etc. under Imrie, but actually if he can increase the marginal gains and he can kind of squeeze more out the current squad, which we're all in broad agreement it should be capable of, then he actually becomes a really successful Rovers manager in the waiting. It wasn't going to have to be a hard sell for me anyway, but I found myself quite quickly on board with Imrie being appointed. It all seemed to kind of make sense, I think. And okay, there's maybe certain kind of rumours or whatever as to quite how much he's been in the driving seat in terms of bringing Millen with him, etc. as well. But again, that can't be a bad thing. If anything, I think it's almost been a criticism or certainly an unanswered question from the previous couple of managers where they've not quite brought their own people with them. I do find it quite reassuring that Imrie's got somebody he trusted. Clearly his nose was out of joint when that came to an end at Morton, and he's chosen to bring him. I fully behind the appointment. I think I said as much at the time that he's either been a pantomime villain, but listen, now he's our pantomime villain, so It's fine with me.
Yeah, definitely. I found my immediate reaction was sort of the opposite of something we talked about a few weeks ago. So remember when we were at East End Park and we talked about the very first kind of popular chorus asking Barry Robson to take a walk, kind of reared its head. And it was like, I expected my immediate reaction to be like, that's a bit soon, or like, maybe no. And actually, I was like, yeah, I completely agree. It was the opposite with this, where it's like, you see, it's Scott Burns is always the first thing you go, right, actually, he tends to be pretty rock solid with these things. So it's a Scott Burns stamped rumour, like Doug Emery's got the Rovers. And as you say, based on all my previous pantomime villain informed viewpoints of Doug Emery, I would have expected my own reaction to be quite negative. And instead, immediately I was like, yeah, I like that. That makes a lot of sense. And then the more you dig into it, it continues to make sense. As you say, he's probably outperforming his budget by, at minimum, 2, possibly 3 league places over the last 4 years with Morton. Now, outperforming your budget by two league places with us, you're solidly in the playoffs. I would have thought, and like that's what you want. That would be great. And I think, as you said, you kind of reeled off the list of the other kind of prospective candidates there, and they're either less experienced than Dougie Imrie, or if they are more experienced than him, they have like a catastrophe under their or on their CV, which it comes with the territory. But you're looking at, as I say, a guy who basically has managed for 4 seasons and has been pretty good for all 4 of those seasons. Like that's easier said than done, particularly with some of the problems he's had to deal with at Morton. So he does. He looks like a kind of like, sometimes it's a bit kind of damning to say this, but he looks like a safe pair of hands. He looks like a guy that you can basically, and I suppose this is what Sean was getting at as well. It's like it's almost like you don't need to worry about Dougie Imrie. Like he's sort of hopefully proven that his kind of basement level of management is pretty good, and so it then lets you almost worry about your recruitment and your retention and all this other stuff because you're like, nah, we've got a rock solid manager. And I think that has all really just been totally reinforced by everything I've seen and heard from him since he came in as well.
Yeah.
Like not only the way that he speaks in kind of the interviews that he's done, but just other bits and pieces. And we talked about this a lot in the kind of dying days of Barry Robson, where it's like the things you hear that naturally come out of a football club about people around the club who've spoken and had interactions with people. And all I'm hearing at the moment is just broadly positive. It seems to be like he's genuinely interested in people. He's polite, he's personable. And then the most obvious example of that was the kind of going around the lounges, which again, I've heard from multiple people, was categorically Dougie Imrie's idea. Like, that wasn't someone from within the club going, look, the last manager got absolutely hammered for his PR approach. See if you go and just say these couple of things in your interview and then maybe do this, you'll get off to a good start. Like that, as I say, more than one person has said that was his idea. He came up with that effectively. And it's only a wee thing. And again, universal truth of football. If we go and lose our next 6 games, then it doesn't matter that he was going and glad-handing the Macmillan Cup before the game. Almost certainly. He's not going to win his next 10 games in a row. He's not going to lose his next 10 games in a row. These things matter in the in-betweens. Robbie, you got to give your kind of overall reaction through the week there. Having had a little bit of time to digest, and obviously now a game of football that we're going to talk about. Have any of your thoughts kind of matured? Anything you want to kind of expand on from last time?
Yeah, like a fine wine, isn't it? It's just been one where, listening to what you guys were both saying there, it's almost like man management of a full support. that's kind of going around and setting that
Yeah.
expectation and being able to sort of say, like, you guys are actually, it's quite valuable. It's really important what you can contribute, and being able to sort of make sure that people do recognise like the importance of sort of keeping the head and being able to go out and talk to people and make sure that, yeah, just the emphasis is placed there. So he's off to a flyer on that front. And to be honest, doesn't really surprise me. What I think is important to remember is that it's with his abilities as a manager, he's very transparent about what he's bringing to the table. And I think that that's why a lot of the people, Scott kind of said that in the last podcast. He was like, look, you weren't alone in your criticism sort of to that point. And again, going back to what Sean said on the terrace, to reference him as well, a lot of people very critical in terms of the way that the type of football was getting played before, which reinforced a standpoint, whereas over the last year, you've kind of seen this evolution in terms of the way that it's been played. What I did think was really good, though, was just to, again, I know that a lot's been made about voice notes and everything that's been said in there, but just the clearly based on from minute one to where he's at now, to where his family are now, it was, I think it's his partner, was sort of put out a tweet basically saying, thanks for making us feel so welcomed. So it's clearly a mutual developing relationship, which is great to see. You want that. You want both your players and your management as a support to sort of feel exactly the same way that we do, in terms of, like, he's obviously touched on that people come and go from a football club. It's very, very trite to say, it's very cliched, but it's true that the fans will still be there. But being able to have that engagement and that relationship there, it does make things a lot easier for both parties. So in terms of the footballing side, I thought it was a very good start, but we'll come on to that in due course.
Yeah, I tell you, we'll stick with you for the first of the kind of the start of the football type stuff. So one change to the starting lineup. Paul McMullen came back in for Callum Smith, and it looked to me like it was a return to a 4-2-3-1, and Dougie Imrie talked about that in his post-match as well. So Dylan Easton back in the middle. Dylan Easton's the 10, and Josh Mullen moved over to the left-hand side. So, Robbie, what did you make of those changes? And more generally, to stick to that theme, what else kind of stood out to you as potentially being sort of a sign of the new manager's influence?
I mean, the formation was probably the main one. I've got next to it just good. The structure was there. We saw what players' strengths were, particularly going into the game. Scott Brown and Paul McMullen. When you're looking at the match as a whole, there was plenty of support up there for Jack Hamilton. I'm a big fan of seeing Dylan Easton centrally. I know that you sort of differ from that view. You want to sort of see him playing off the left, but I think that if we have him through the middle, he can sort of be more of a focal point and bring others in. What I did find really interesting was using Josh Mullen off the left. I don't think, Scott's certainly made vocal about being able to utilise him there. A few moments where I've sort of seen him cut onto his other foot and be able to bring the ball inside to cross it in. He was having a real impact from that position. It's great to see that sort of. The good thing that I like about Josh Mullen, having him in your team, is that he's one of these people that he comes across in that he'd obviously want to be playing on the wing, on the right, but he's a team player. He'll go out and do whatever you ask him to. And we've seen that on numerous different occasions before where we've needed to use him in different positions. Very structured, very positive in terms of the way that we were passing the ball about and how we were being able to pop things through the midfield. So yeah, overall, very, very good, especially in that first half.
Greg, was there anything that stood out to you that particularly struck you as a Dougie Imrie directive?
Yeah, I suppose there was more of a, I don't know if freedom's the right word, but there certainly seemed to be more of a fluidity to some of the movement, particularly in the attacking side of the things. I think Easton, we saw him kind of, not that he hasn't ever before come deep for the ball or whatever, but it didn't quite seem always out of desperation this time. And if we go back to, and you made reference to East End when the kind of the chants first started about Robson, and Easton was coming deep a lot that game, and it just totally nullified Easton in the game. Yesterday I felt was the total converse to that. I thought he was actually quite effective in coming to bring the play back up the pitch and kind of act as that link. I think Mullen playing on the left, McMullen on the right, kind of showed a wee bit of kind of, I suppose, rolling the dice. But Imrie talked about that in his post-match interview, that he's going to call on players to do that. And I quite like the fact, actually, he talked about, I've been speaking to people already about what certain players are or are not capable of, and I'm going to ask them to be doing things. And a big part of that is, like, listen, you're managing in the Championship, you've got a set squad, you're going to have to kind of mix and match it sometimes. But none of yesterday, the setup, the kind of initial play, none of it felt like, oh, here we go again, it's because of injuries that we have to do this or we have to do whatever. Even though it was quite unorthodox to some extent, namely Mullen playing off the left, it felt and looked all right. It wasn't a kind of, well, that's an eyebrow raised right away. Why has Imrie done that? Why has he done this? I think you could see quite clearly within, 4 days really of training that he's had with the squad, some of these ideas are starting to bleed through, and listen, that can only be a positive thing going forward.
See, just to come in there, I do find it interesting that this 4-2-3-1's kind of like the modern 4-4-2, isn't it? In a sense of, like, during the 90s, everyone played a 4-4-2. It was kind of par for the course. Whereas now, maybe it's just moving away from sort of these chopping and changing back threes and wing backs, etc., to sort of go to that formation where maybe the players do have the comfort. And again, it's been debatable with some of the latter days of Robson in the last few games about what we've actually been doing and where we've been going with things. With this, I think it's very structured, as I say, as to where we were headed and what we were planning to do in this game.
Yeah, I think you've both hit on the point I want to make there, which is, like, it just all felt very deliberate. It's a word we use a lot, and again, it feels quite, it feels like quite a low bar. Like, yeah, well done, you didn't accidentally do a lot of the stuff that you did. Like, it's actually a great example that you used there about Easton at East End Park, where he was effectively playing as a second striker, and it just wasn't working, so he was coming deep. Whereas that was clearly not what happened yesterday. It was very clearly deliberate. Something that tied in with something that Doug Imrie. I realised I can only use Doug Imrie's first full name.
Yeah, it's a full name person.
I don't know if that's standing out to anyone else, but we're 17 minutes in this podcast, and I've said Doug Imrie 500 times, and I haven't said Dougie or Imrie separately once. So let's see how that goes. But something he was saying in the Courier yesterday morning was about, talking about 4-2-3-1 and talking about his approach, and saying that, something I thought was really illustrative. Like, I don't think it was a dig by any means at all, but he's like, look, sometimes you need to play some passes, you need to let the opposition come at you and then play around them, and don't go long because that plays into their hands. Now, bearing in mind, he's been one of the opposition managers within the last 8 weeks. Like, yeah, because you've been playing into his hands when you were doing that. But it was something else he said, where he says, we've got the players who are good enough to do that little turn on a sixpence and create a bit of space. And that's where I think I'm actually going to walk back something I've said previously, because you're right, Robbie. Generally speaking, I do prefer Dylan Easton on the left, but I thought he was brilliant in that role yesterday, and I thought it really worked, and it worked in a way as a team we haven't really. And I also don't think, by the way, that, like, oh, it's only League One Alloa is like that much of a sort of caveat that you need to apply, because I think it was more just about the basics of the game, and that actually, and also, first of all, I think Alloa are a decent side, but also I think
games
this,
unbeaten going into this one. Like, you can't. I don't think you can really sort of.
I don't think the sorry. Like, I don't think that the things I'm about to say, that, like, the positives that worked, like, wouldn't have suddenly worked if you translated them into a game against Pittodrie or Arbroath or Ayr United. I think it would all kind of broadly still apply, basically, I think is what I'm saying here. Because the thing that worked for me was when Easton was coming back and dropping in, he wasn't doing anything too fancy. He wasn't trying to kind of overplay. He was dropping back just deep enough that he could receive a pass, facing ostensibly the wrong way. But he receives the pass, he makes a half turn, and he then plays the ball into the feet of Scott Brown, who crucially is now facing the right direction with half the football pitch in front of him. where for pretty much all of this season, Scott Brown has either been the one receiving the pass and is facing the wrong direction, or he's been 30 yards further up the park. And so when he's getting the ball, he doesn't then have the space to move into. And we saw, I don't know how many times yesterday, possibly more than the rest of this season combined, Scott Brown doing what Scott Brown is good at, which is picking the ball up, not too far into his own half, and then just dragging the game 30 yards further forward. And that little Easton coming back and playing a 5-yard pass let him do that. And I thought it wasn't happening all the time. It wasn't like the keystone of the performance. But the few times that it did happen, it was like, this is good. This is deliberate. This is two guys doing two things they've been asked that leads to a better outcome than a lot of what we've seen from them at other points this season. And there were a couple other things as well, but I won't kind of labour the point. But it was wee things like that. I was like, I'm pretty encouraged. You're kind of watching this. To go kind of into the game itself, kind of funny game to talk through in the structure that we've imposed on ourselves. So we go through the highlights. There's not a huge amount of kind of talking points. Again, I think it's mostly around about the kind of way the game developed. But Robbie, if we take the first kind of half hour, the first 29 minutes effectively, the kind of key highlight is Josh Mullen's free kick that goes just over the bar. So definitely I want to know if you thought that had gone in. But also, more generally, just that first half hour, how did you feel as the game kind of settled down?
Yeah, it was a very positive start, and I wrote down in my notes that we started on the front foot, and we'd really dispelled quite quickly the notion that we should be intimidated or by this idea of being a cup upset, because that's going to be there. The players undoubtedly are going to be going into this one to some degree. They'll be like, okay, we really hope it's not us. There's always some team that slips up at this point in the cup, and their fans are then subsequently raging. This season, St Johnstone are that team where you look and you think, they should have got through against them. Alloa, as I said before, 10 games unbeaten. It's not a mean feat that we've, it's League One Alloa, we should be getting through there anyway. They've been performing really well. Admittedly, they did have a big game against Inverness during the week, but it's not one that you can really dismiss and take easily. So to see us go and put the sort of boot on the neck, for lack of a better phrase, almost straight off the off, was fantastic. As you say, seeing these players that you should have a degree of confidence in, given their experience. Scott Brown has came in for a lot of criticism recently. Now, there has been a bit of a phrase that's been used in some quarters saying, if you sign a Peterhead captain, then you're going to get Peterhead standards, which I've seen a few people say, completely ignoring the fact that he's been excellent for the last 2 years. He was majestic in midfield yesterday, I thought, Scott Brown. I thought that he was tremendous at getting the ball forward, really being able to sort of impose himself onto the game and to be able to, as you say, pull us up the pitch, thanks to as well with Dylan Easton contributing. Paul McMullen looks like he's gradually becoming a bit more relaxed and a bit more confident in terms of the position that he's playing and not having to sort of sit as a forward or do any other extra bits, because Jordan Doherty and Paul McMullen on Twitter, sort of the immediate reaction was talking about their partner, just in terms of the setup for the goal. So we'll come on to that. As for Mullen's free kick, it looked like it was going in. I didn't think it hit the net because I saw it, because I wasn't that low enough into the south stand to think it was in. But it was quite funny to see. There must have been a cut off at some point, just a line in where it was like the people that believed and the people that didn't, which was quite ironic given that the goal that we did score, I didn't actually think went in. Yeah. I thought he put it wide.
Yeah,
it was an odd one.
It was like watching Penn and Teller. It was like an optical illusion.
Yes, I really liked in the post-match, Davey basically asks him, he says, he's like, I don't really remember what happened. And then Davey kind of like elaborates on his question and says, did you just kind of kick the ball on the ground? And he's like, genuinely, I do not know. Like, I have no recollection, don't know what happened, ball went in, I don't care. Certainly not gonna disagree with that. But it's a it's a good move, to be fair. There's some good football in this.
Mhm.
So it's a long ball out from the goalkeeper that Jordan Doherty wins initially. Heads ball at the park to Dylan Easton, who doesn't do anything kind of too fancy, just kind of recycles the ball into the midfield, and it goes through kind of Paul Niso to Scott Brown to Paul McMullen for Jordan Doherty, who then is on a full charge on the kind of underlap. Again, just picks up sort of 30-40 yards through strong running. He slips the ball back at the channel for Paul McMullen, who then cuts it back to him, and we get a deft finish, maybe. Greg, your thoughts on the goal, please.
So I'm the same as Robbie. That for all the world, and obviously you and I have the same vantage point, but that for a good 2 seconds, which felt a lot longer at the time, for all the world, I thought it'd gone wide, and I thought it was well worked, and it was an excellent chance up to that point, and then I thought it was just one of these like, oh, that's a shame. And then conversely, actually, just going briefly back to the Mullen free kick, like there's a woman maybe kind of midway up the south stand who, for a good 2 or 3 seconds, was celebrating this goal, this phantom goal, to the point that I'm looking at it going, have I missed something here? Like, has that actually gone in and I've just not seen it? So it was a weird one, but I think, and this is going to sound almost like damning with faint praise, but it was just really simple stuff, but really effective. Like nothing there was like a spectacular turn and bit of play, or a bit of individual skill to get past one player. Actually, it was the sort of drill that you can well imagine, transitional play coming off the training field. You're working it, passing, but getting movement up the pitch. And again, not a criticism of sort of Robson or anything like that, but it's not the sort of goal I could see us scoring under Robson, if that makes sense. I think that's something that Dougie Imrie already is kind of bringing to the team is, listen, we are short on goals, and I think he's acknowledged that even though we got the win yesterday, and we'll come on to that. The fact that, how do you score goals where you're going to need the ball, you're going to need to create chances, and I think that was abundant yesterday across the pattern of play, and the goal is then typical of that. I think you're bringing your players into positions that they're comfortable in, into possession in areas that they're comfortable having it, and then you're opening up opportunities for the likes of McMullen in a position he's comfortable taking it to create a chance. And then Doherty, it seems to suit him kind of bombing in, probably an out-of-body experience for him to be hitting the ball and then kind of going for goal. But it's definitely reassuring to see a chance like that being created, even if it hadn't resulted in a goal. That was just a really positive phase of play.
Yeah. Robbie, do you think that is something that, I suppose not necessarily the whole of the goal, but that run from Jordan Doherty that he makes, where he, from pretty early on in that move, pretty far back, he's just kind of angling in for the penalty spot. Is that something you think could have reasonably happened earlier in the season, or are we also choosing to hand credit to Dougie Imrie for that as well?
We're fully on the Dougie Imrie train, aren't we? So it's complete credit to him. In all seriousness, I mean, it happened maybe on a few occasions. You remember Paul McMullen getting through in the derby and then just chips it into the keeper's hands, or then you look at Richard Chin's goal against Arbroath. But let's be honest, it wasn't that common. And I think that, to go back to what Greg said, it felt like it was more a case of circumstance rather than one where it was planned. You mentioned training ground moves, etc., and the players will know what they're working on themselves and what's happening. But this one felt very much like if we can get people, as he says, playing to their strengths and getting confidence, then things like that are far more likely to happen, rather than if you're playing a game of sort of chance. And I know that, again, to slaughter Robson because he's away, it's effective when you're playing a numbers game of like, we're going to put the ball up high and you're going to press them and then it's going to happen. And then you sort of say, but then after, Barry, what's going to happen after that? What happens if it doesn't work? What happens if it's... Whereas this is more like, we're going to strategically go out. You can do this. We know you do this really well. So go out and do it. And that's basically across the pitch, which, hopefully bodes for good times.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, actually. That whole get the ball at the park as quickly as you can and then sort of see what happens. You compare that to the pass that Jordan Doherty plays to Paul McMullen, where he's kind of just, as I say, kind of slipping it into that channel. As you say, Greg, like there's nothing clever about that. It's not like, oh, what a pass he's picked. It's the most obvious thing for him to do, because you're putting your winger into a place where he's sort of then attacking the box and he's got options in the middle. It's like, yeah, that's good. More of that, please. You're creating, dare I say it, you're creating higher quality penalty box entries is what you're doing. And it's obviously in the end up, it doesn't need to be an incredible finish actually, and you can kind of get away with that. And it's kind of goes back to something we've been saying recently, that if you don't shoot, you don't score. That's a very good example of, well, if you do shoot, sometimes you do score, even if it wasn't a very good shot. And the fact that that was the only goal of the game, I think, is probably quite illustrative of the fact that it's a lot easier said than done, kind of fixing that goal scoring issue on a macro level. We've not suddenly gone to being a free flowing, free scoring team, but there's opportunity in there to get more out of to get more goals with the players that we've got. Just to kind of, I suppose, characterise the whole of the first half, really, and take into account the last kind of 15 minutes of it. There was, I was going to say there was kind of steadfast defending. I don't know, that would almost kind of suggest that Alloa were really kind of piling on the pressure, and they weren't really. The Rovers were having to defend well, but they were kind of limiting Alloa to kind of not an awful lot. Greg, a minute or two ago, Robbie said that the Rovers were kind of foot on the throat of Alloa for this first half. Not to necessarily just pick an argument between you and him, but would you agree with that assertion, that characterisation?
On balance, probably not. I don't think but I think when the Rovers were in possession and were attacking, I agree with Robbie that it felt comfortable, it felt controlled, and it felt very, as we've discussed already, very deliberate. And at risk of kind of sounding like I'm belittling Alloa, which really isn't my intention, I thought they were a really well organised, a really well disciplined team. They moved the ball about quite a bit as well, but I also felt it was quite controlled and quite kind of managed by Rovers as well. I'm actually minded of a comment I made, I think, after the Ayr game, when I said about Scott Brown could well have said, that was like one of these pre-season games where you think that was really useful for us because it let us run through a lot of the motions. In a lot of ways, I felt the same yesterday. I never really felt Alloa were likely to score at any point. I mean, the game, we'll maybe come on to it, but when Connor Salmon comes on, it changes slightly, the kind of complexion of the game. Maybe at that point I was a wee bit, maybe not concerned, but starting to think, how's this panning out? But for the latter stages of the first half and for most of the game, I almost welcomed the opportunity to see how the Rovers' defence would cope. And actually, they stood up to it pretty well. And again, it's League One, Alloa, etc., etc. But I'll go back to my point of a minute ago, is it's actually quite a high-flying Alloa team at the minute, and okay, they're susceptible to their own flaws, etc. But you can only play the team that's in front of you, and I think that Alloa were a pretty decent test for Imrie's first game. And I think, Rovers in possession were controlled, and I think when we were defending, we did it in a really managed way that was never panicked, it was never rushed. There was a couple of kind of misplaced passes, particularly Ray kind of wanting to play that sweeper keeper role, and that gets the backup of some fans. But listen, I've no issue with that, and that just, I think Imrie himself mentioned, like, if we're wanting teams to come out and open up, that's exactly how we're going to need to play. So I'm comfortable with that, because it's clearly, again, part of that deliberate approach. It's part of Dougie Imrie's kind of plan for what's going to happen. And I'm confident that across that sort of back four, across the two sixes that he's talking about, whatever, utilising we've got the personnel to cope with that. I think and especially looking ahead, if we play like that against the vast majority of Championship sides, famous last words, but I also think we should be pretty well placed to manage that as well.
It's an interesting dynamic across this game because the two halves, I think, were really quite different. And it might be as simple as Connor Salmon coming on, really. And I mean, he wasn't massively involved in that second half. He has the one big chance, as you say, but it did. It felt the first half. And I know what you mean, Robbie, when you said what you did. It was like the Rovers weren't really giving Alloa a sniff. They weren't creating a huge amount either, but it was almost, particularly once they got the goal, it was like the kind of epitome of like a professional playing aside from the team below in the cup, where you're in complete control. You're not taking chances, as in you're not gambling more than you need to, and you're not giving them anything, and you're just letting the game kind of run along. Second half, Connor Salmon comes on. Alloa start to offer a little bit more. I think they'll be pretty disappointed with how little they actually offered over the piece, but they started to offer a little bit more. And Dougie Imrie, in his post-match, full name again, talks about the second half. The Rovers got a wee bit scrappier, and they kind of misplaced a few chances, and the subs disrupted them a bit. But I would argue the Rovers looked more dangerous second half. Like, the game as a whole opened up. I'm just going to condense this right down because there's not really a huge amount that's worth kind of really dragging out. There's a chance that Jack Hamilton has where Scott Brown kind of plays him in, and he's the keeper's so quick off his line, which really digs him out, because I think Hamilton does brilliantly actually to beat the defender, but the keeper is then just there on him. And Paul McMullen then tries to kind of lob the keeper, and he gets back and tips it over. There's Connor Salmon kind of shooting into the side netting after he's played through, and then Jack Hamilton has a header that the keeper gathers, and he's another one that goes very close with, but he kind of glances wide. So I say the game did kind of open up. I thought the Rovers looked more dangerous. Robbie, I want to specifically talk about the subs in a second or two, and we'll go through that. But in terms of the character of the game, the sort of pattern of the game, as it did open up a little bit more in the second half, were you always comfortable?
Yeah, to a reasonable degree. Might feed into what you guys have already kind of said and what Dougie Imrie's spoken about in his interviews, saying that to have that ability to create chances, you also want your opponents to come out and try and get that. And Alloa, with there only being a goal in it, was close. Connor Salmon absolutely had an impact in the game in the sense that he came on and offered them something different. I think before Luke Rankin wasn't really doing too much. I know that the sort of Alloa fans had sort of spoken about before as well. The lad Adamson, he comes off the bench later on as well, and really doesn't really get into grips with the game by the time that it's ended. But yeah, it's overall though, yeah, we were able to, and again, you don't know how much of it comes. I don't really feel like there's much of a gap nowadays between part-time and full-time football. That we're obviously the very lower end of the full-time spectrum, whereas they're top end of the part-time. I think in terms of fitness, there's not really going to be too much there. I don't think it's as big a gap as it was maybe 15, 20 years ago. But we were able to exploit those extra yards that you probably find because Alloa are being a bit more aggressive. They are sort of saying, okay, we might have a chance of being able to get an equaliser, even though I would say over the piece they didn't really create too much. And that's kind of what I was going back to when I sort of said, like, put on the throat, was kind of strangling the game more than anything else. It wasn't that we were creating gilt-edged chances. But yeah, to move on to the subs, some really interesting changes there. I mean, Matthews for Paul Niso's a like-for-like change, and I thought that Matthews came on and reasonably assured performance, and I thought Niso was absolutely fine. A few moments where he was maybe a bit naive, for lack of a better term, scrappy at points, but overall still adds something to the team, I would say. But then you're going into the Ewan Wilson for Paul McMullen, which is the real sort of, we can do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a good one. That was one of the ones where you get everybody scrambling just for a second to be like, it's really good because it's only the time between, because you can see who's standing at the side of the park. It's only the time it takes Paul McMullen to get across the pitch, and then the time it takes Ewan Wilson to take up a vague position, that you've got like this an inordinate amount of like, where's he going? Where's he going to play? Who's going where? Who could this be? Can he play right wing? Can he play left wing? Can he go to left? And you're like, but we could all just wait 24 seconds and we would find out, but there's no fun in that. And Ewan Wilson does indeed come on to left wing, comes on at left mid, and Josh Mullen switched over to the other side. And as you said to me at the time, Greg, I can't remember exactly how you led into it. Possibly you may have said, I'm not entirely sure about this. He's like, coming on at left wing. It's like, can he play wing back? So we'll see how this goes. But, well, let's we can take it specifically. How do you think he did get on, actually, over the remainder of that game?
So I don't know. I think I'm still not entirely sure I've processed what I saw. I think he did absolutely fine. And actually, I think what it really boils down to is Dougie Imrie's man management of that situation. So, as you've just alluded to, my point at the time when he's come on is, what on earth is this? We've tried him with three at the back and playing at wing back, and that was a bit of a disaster. And I don't think that's necessarily his fault. It's not the position he's comfortable in. He's a left back and a full back at that. But then I'm going, he's actually doing all right. But it was almost like at times he was just playing as almost like an inverted full back, in the sense that he's further up the park, but he's just that facilitator to then kind of take the ball. He's not been asked to bomb on, which he's never going to do, but he's still there, and he's a competent footballer who's able to then take the ball. He's physical enough that he can hold the ball up in that area, and it's then freeing up Easton or whoever to kind of move Matthews to move around and kind of open the game up a wee bit. So actually, from that point of view, it seemed to work really well, because, again, playing as that kind of inverted aspect, he's protected. He knows Stevenson's behind him. So where the big difference between him being the wing back is, well, it's on him. If the play switches, he's got to bomb back. Whereas actually, if he's playing on the left wing, whilst I wouldn't want to see it every week, he's comfortable in the knowledge that he's got his full back behind him. Okay, different again because the Rovers are 1-0 up, so it's a slightly. I mean, it'd be different if you're chasing the game. But I do think that seemed to work, and I think it forced Alloa to really consider what they were playing in front of them and what sort of shape that was going to take. So, listen, whether it was, well, I'm going to assume based on the balance of play, it was a deliberate action from Dougie Imrie. But I think I'd need to see something like that again in practice to really come to a full conclusion on it. Aye.
So it's beyond that. So that was kind of 68 minutes. We get those two subs. 10 minutes after that, we get Callum Smith and Josh Jennings on for Jack Hamilton and Josh Mullen. More or less kind of straight swaps there. And then 5 minutes after that, J. Rowe came on for Scott Brown. J. Rowe going to right back, and Jordan Doherty kind of shifting into the midfield. Now, Robbie, certainly if you get anything specific on any of those, I'd like to hear it. But also, and listen, a better host would have done the research on this. It doesn't feel like kind of too recently or too often we've seen the Rovers using all five subs. Certainly when it's not been enforced. Do you think that's just a new manager finding out about his squad, or did that feel like more of a sort of shift in approach to you?
No, I think it's probably more a shift of an approach and sort of being able to utilise the bodies that are there. And you're always going to benefit, I feel, as a manager if you're being able to get more out of your squad as a whole. And I think that was probably one of the sort of sins of the previous regime of, like, it almost felt like there was a lack of belief in some of the players. and to be able to utilise those options. And Davy Hancock and Dougie Imrie both sort of chat about this in the post-match interview, and sort of saying, like, the players have obviously, there's been players that have been starters, but also as well to make sure that appetites are sort of whetted for the players that are on the bench, and saying, like, you're a part of the squad. Like, you need to be coming on and proving a point and saying, like, right, okay, that guy's got the jersey now, but I'm going to take that off him and be available, and I'm going to be a good option for you. So yeah, it was with the subs. I felt that Callum Smith had a relatively quiet game. I think the same for Gentles as well. But at that point, it was, you were kind of keeping an eye on the clock and sort of saying, like, we're seeing off Alloa, they're not creating too much. We are still getting through, we're having chances, we're kind of getting the break of the ball up the further up the pitch. You are still seeing sort of phases of play where we're sort of getting the ball forward. So it's not sort of an opportunity to, or not one where you're going to be digging out players, for example. You're not going to be saying, well, because you've won the game, you don't need to look too much into it, which is nice. It's good. And there'll be another opportunity for them down the road if we're going down that way. Jordan Doherty in midfield, good to see him in there as well. He's got multiple roles that he can play, so to be able to use that's really handy, that we can bring in J-Ro and to sort of have him come on and to be able to mix it up. So yeah, bizarre to see sort of 4 people all playing those central roles in midfield across a game.
Yeah, J-Ro, I'm really interested to see what happens with J-Ro under Dougie Imrie. I feel like with J-Ro, it's like just when I thought he was out, he's pulled me back in. There's a new manager and he's getting a fresh start. Like maybe I like, because I'm absolutely wedded to this. There's a player in there, and yeah, I'm not prepared to give up on him just yet. So
I think, to be honest, there's probably 4 or 5 players I would say that across the squad. Like, just where you want to see them, and you want to see them a wee bit of sort of just puff their chests out, heats up high, and you've got a manager that's going to fully back you. Again, don't know what the dynamics were like with Barry Robson, but just that reliance on certain players, and it sort of all points towards being less sort of belief, whereas this is a guy that's like, okay, coming in, and you look at what he's done with other players before, which is the real sort of I know that a lot's been made about sort of Dougie Imrie, and I know that, not that this was the point that you were making, Greg, but sort of saying like the pantomime villain and all that sort of stuff. People forget there's a human aspect there as well, of like the man management, the being able to get players performing to their best, and the sort of evolution that he's had, and that's why it's kind of getting a bit more excitement, should I say, about the appointment.
He seems like such a players manager as well, and I don't doubt that you could find players who've played under him who can't stand him. Like guys who didn't get the minutes they thought they wanted.
Lewis Strap
would be number one on that list. And I'm sure that there are lots of them, but he just has that kind of vibe to him that if you had been not feeling brilliant about your own performances, he's not going to come in and be like, "What's wrong with you? How come you're so shite?" Like, he's going to be there with the arm around the shoulder. And, like, I think it would feel like a fresh start. You'd feel like this guy's going to give me the chance to prove myself. And as you say, there's multiple guys that could apply to varying degrees. Because again, there's absolutely some guys that specifically whether they're at the Rovers or not, there'll be football players that you watch and think, that guy must be really beating himself up because he's been poor for weeks and he will not, like, couldn't care less. Just either it's like ironclad confidence or total lack of self-awareness. Like, just doesn't care less.
Again,
but the guys that do, as I say, I think Dougie Imrie just seems like exactly that kind of guy. And to be fair, he more or less says that in his interview as well. He's talking more specifically about asking players to do different jobs, but it does just seem like he's very open-minded and very much like, it's not going, right, Ewan, we're kind of low on numbers today, and I need to bring Paul McMillan off. So I'm going to put you on at left wing. And I know you're not totally comfortable there, mate. But, if you just go, instead it's like, listen, I know you've got this. I know you've got that. So I'm going to put you on at left wing. Do this, do this, do this. You'll be absolutely grand. It's just these wee kind of things that it's very easy to imagine that's...
the fun of being a football fan, isn't it? Having the imagination of what
Absolutely.
someone else is like.
Yeah.
Like, we've got no idea, but we're going to speculate. It's great fun.
Entirely informed by what is effectively Stockholm syndrome as well.
Yeah.
Because if you had asked me 10 days ago, please characterise a conversation on the touchline between Doug Imrie and one of his players, it would not have been in this tone, I tell you that much. But again, I don't know if I'd ever necessarily actually watched a full interview with him before, and be very impressed with what I've heard.
There's also the element as well in terms of, and it'll be interesting to see St Johnstone next week, Ross County the week after it, if he goes down the route of using the 5 subs again, because again, there's an element, without being cynical, there's an element of me maybe thinks as well, like for a whole multitude of reasons, he's desperate to hit the ground running and to be a success at the Rovers. So I suppose it's a good chance to really see what he's got to work with. And if he is using the 5 subs routinely, then he's got to strike while he can in January, if that makes sense. So I think he's got to give players a fair crack to then maybe go, listen, there was a bit of a preconceived opinion already. I've seen you in training. I've seen you in a couple of games now, but for him to go to the board, go to Potter, whatever, and say, like, these are X, Y, and Z, we need to be moving on. And they're now going to, I can't get out of them what I'm needing out of them. And I think a big part of that is less like they're shit and we can't use them, but maybe more like, well, actually, in the case of Wilson, like, well, and he's a lone player, and I'm not quite sure exactly the details in terms of January and beyond, but looking at him going, well, I can use him on the left of a midfield. There's a versatility there. Whereas if he's throwing players in and giving them, especially the timing of some of the subs, and if he's giving them sort of 15, 20 minutes, 25 minutes in a game, and then he's going, I'm not really sure I can use you in the trenches, so to speak, then it's a case of he's done his homework. He can then sort of, with confidence, say, we need that turnover. We need, there's no point looking to the summer. If the turnover needs to happen, which it will need to happen to some extent, it's got to start in January.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And it's, again, I think a lot of that is, it helps to legitimise his opinions. And again, not necessarily healthy for a football manager to be worried about what other people think. But it is the case that, again, if you go to a player and you say, right, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, and you've given him 4 games in a row to prove himself, then at least there's a body of evidence there. And I thought his interview was, again, we're still very clearly in this kind of honeymoon period where we're just kind of blowing smoke up his arse. But I really enjoyed the interview as well. And again, sometimes, listen, maybe this is a low bar to clear, but just when he was talking to Davey about being nervous before the game, and just kind of, I felt like a player again, which I thought was a really interesting way to frame that. And it would actually be, I'm actually interested to hear, like, generally, with other managers who were players, like, how do the nerves on a Saturday morning compare as a player as they do to a manager? And it was an interesting way to kind of characterise that.
What I really liked about that interview was the fact that, and again, it comes back to personality as well, and just in terms of how they are. A lot of it reminds me of Ian Murray, and I said that sort of before on the pre-match podcast. Sometimes with some managers, like, they just lay out the game in a relatively, like, simple manner. They don't, like, treat you like the audience are, like, completely, I've never watched a game of football before, but also at the same time, there'll be things that we don't fully appreciate, and clearly that's going to be the case. Like, you've got to have that self-awareness as a fan to sort of say, there's going to be bits that are going to be well beyond my head because you play this game and you work on it day in, day out, and you're professionals at what you do. But there are some bits where you just, and again, some managers have it, some don't. Sometimes you get managers that don't have it, but it doesn't really matter because they can get away with it because they deliver it and they can speak to the football players in a manner that's going to translate to the football players. Probably, arguably, you could say that was the case for John McGlynn. Like, sometimes you would listen to his interviews and be a bit like, not too sure about that. But you could tell the squad 100% bought into it, and you listen to the people that have worked under John McGlynn and particularly how he's evolved. I just can't help but get this feeling that we've caught Dougie Imrie at the right time, and like nobody would have maybe expected it a month ago. And it's just been, when you look at it, kind of a lot of the things get said about like moving jobs and things, and you probably have a degree of comfort, and you always think like, oh, but I like the people that I work with, and I don't want to move because what if it's not as good? But then you never really think about that. Actually, there's maybe going to be people that I get really well with at this new job, and there are other people out there. So, yeah, I think that it was a very professional performance yesterday that we saw across the piece, and it's only going to breed sort of the confidence and optimism that you need to see in a situation where we've largely, for the most maybe a couple of months, been quite devoid of confidence, whether it's internally within the club. So that's why a lot of the mood music about what he's talking about in terms of we need everyone on the same page. We need to get people back together and sort of have a united front. And he's talking about getting the place rocking in his first interview. Like, that's what you want as a fan. You want to see that, and you can buy into that. Nobody's going to say, nah, really want Stars to be quiet on a Saturday. Like, it benefits everyone.
Yeah, it's a very kind of trite thing to say, but it was only the fact that game was 1-0 yesterday that meant there were nerves attached to it. Like, the pattern of the game, Alloa weren't really creating anything. The Rovers were getting chances. You know, if that plays out and it's 2-0, everybody's just completely relaxed. It's like, oh, we're just winning this easily. And again, I realise how trite that is. It's like, yeah, and if it was 7-0, everybody would be delighted. Like, obviously. But it's like it was the wider context that meant there was a wee bit of nerves about it, rather than what was actually happening within that game. It's a one-goal lead, anything could happen, and when a team's low on confidence, sometimes those things just do happen. And, you know, if Alloa had scored in the last minute from a corner, like, nobody would have been kind of bowled over, and you would have had people saying, oh, same old things about, you know, X, Y, Z. Sometimes that's just what happens.
It was a 1-0 that was more likely to end as a 2-0 rather than a 1-1 as far as I was concerned. Like, it's just one where definitely, when you see the fuller picture, you're like, that's a 1-0 against Alloa. There's more likely to be a 2-0. We'll take it because we're in the next round and it's a clean sheet.
That's when you look at the highlights and you look back at like Alloa's chances. It's like a shot over the bar from 25 yards, a shot that's blocked on the edge of the box, an overhead kick that doesn't reach the goal line. Like, that's not to be dismissive. Like, those are the chances that were there. The big one obviously is Connor Salmon running through. But like, even at that, that's not. You know, if that was the only chance the Rovers had in the game, we wouldn't have been going like, oh, we were, you know, so close, and counting it as a goal. And it was a very professional performance, and like, that's not something to be sniffed at with some of the performances recently. I think we were 1 win in 8 going into that one. So you take your wins however you can get them, and certainly 100%. That was very, very composed, very kind of professional, and gives us a bit of a platform. Obviously, the one obvious upside of winning your cup game is that you're in the hat for the next round. The draw was done just a couple of minutes before we started recording. So the Rovers will travel to Pittodrie to play Aberdeen in the next round. Robbie, this one certainly gives that's an easy draw if you're the social media team. A whole load of very easy narratives to draw around that, and JPEGs to drag out the folder. Is it time to bring Gregory Taddy out of cold storage?
It's always time to bring Gregory Taddy out of cold storage as far as I'm concerned. He's probably still absolutely shredded. Wouldn't surprise me. I think his knees are maybe a bit gone now. Yes, fond memories of Pittodrie on a cold Tuesday evening, as it was, I believe.
I think that might be the only time I've seen the Rovers at Pittodrie.
Yeah, I've not been back up since that game, and I don't think it would be topped because it was absolutely tremendous. Albeit I'm throwing the gauntlet down here to Dougie Imrie's Rovers to go up to Pittodrie and replicate it. But yeah, Aberdeen, look, there's going to be a wee bit of a while to play before the game, I believe. So, you know, you never know how the form table we'll look at that point. We've got a difficult month ahead. But the most important thing is we're in the next round. It's going to be a difficult tie, undoubtedly. But we're through to a point where I doubt it'll be on the telly. I'd be quite surprised by that, given some of the other sort of more TV attractive deals, shall we say, with sort of Celtic and who they're playing in particular. Just keen to see how we measure up against an Aberdeen team who, up until recently, much like ourselves, not without their troubles to seek.
And Greg, your reaction to that draw?
Aye, much the same as Robbie, really. It was one of I was looking before the draw was made, and you're looking at all the kind of numbers up on the screen, and you're kind of going, right, there's different strands to approach it. If you're looking at it from a purely competitive point of view, then you probably, with the greatest respect, want to draw somebody like Camelin at Starks, and you just want to kind of get that over and done with into the next round again. And then you're thinking, right, alternatively, do you want to go for the kind of so-called money spinners early doors, and do you want to be drawn away at Parkhead or Ibrox or whatever and get that share of the TV money and the gate money? And then in between, you're going, but what would be a laugh? And then you're like, well, actually, like you don't want a championship side, home or away. You just don't want a team that you're playing 4 times in the league season. You're also not wanting the recency kind of hanging over you with the likes of Livy, Falkirk, etc. So then you're kind of narrowing the field down and becoming incredibly picky. So drawing somebody like Aberdeen away, aye, that's decent, because on paper, listen, you've got a puncher's chance of going up there and doing something. The reality is, you're going to go up and get bodied. Listen, that's fine. I would much rather go to Pittodrie and even if it ends up 3 or 4-0, I'd much rather that than see us go to Grangemouth and lose 1-0. If you get what I mean. It's somewhere that we don't go all that often, and I think it, like, without getting all kind of cliched, it is a Scottish Cup tie. It feels like a bit of kind of novelty. It feels like there's a bit of, I don't know, there's something. They are the holders, I suppose, is the obvious point, but there's something about going to a stadium like Pittodrie, a team like Aberdeen, and thinking, aye, this is Scottish Cup football.
They're only the holders because Casper Schmeichel hates playing at Hampden Park, apparently. Sorry, that was just a clear and nothing against Aberdeen, not taken away from your Scottish Cup win last season. Just easy dig at Casper Schmeichel.
That was just an open goal from the halfway line. But that, it's exactly that. I think you're hitting the nail on the head there, Greg. It's a proper cup tie. That is a very easy headlines made Scottish Cup tie going up to Pittodrie. And I mean, I tell you categorically right now, whenever we do the pre-match for it, whoever is on, by the end of it, we will be convinced that we're going to win that game. Like, because that's, and as you say, like, that's a proper cup game in the way that going away to anybody, in fact, home or away, anybody in the Championship just wouldn't be. Even, like, with the greatest respect to Alloa, like a League One side at home, it's too banana skinny to feel like a real cup tie. It feels like the stakes are too high almost of losing to really be able to enjoy it. So really, I think that's, as you say, what you want is like a non-league side, really, where you get to basically be the big baddies for a day, but that can be quite fun. Or it's going away to one of the bigger sides and really, kind of making a day of it. So, I think 3rd week in January by the time these games come around. So certainly a good deal of time for Dougie Imrie to, I must have said his full name 8,000 times.
Continue to say.
I'm going to continue. To really kind of put his stamp on his team, it will be very much his team by that point. I mean, to be fair, on average tenure of Rovers managers, it could be somebody else by that point. They're on like a half-life. But yeah, we'll see how that comes around. Just one other thing before we go, just a bit of kind of bad news out of the Community Foundation, the youth sides today. The 2009s, Robbie Brown and that team, a double leg break, which is, I mean, never good for anybody at any time. So certainly, I'm sure I'll obviously get the support from the foundation, and just a word from us as well. that all the best and quick recovery on that, because that's a
Absolutely.
real nasty one. In terms of podcast episodes, we will be back later in the week, as you would imagine, because we are every single week, to look forward to a suddenly very intriguing game away at McDermott Park against St Johnstone. As little as about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I'd have been looking at this one kind of through my fingers, but actually there's a bit of a chance to go and give them a bloody nose. That they probably are going into the game with a bloody nose. A good chance to just dunt them, really make it sting. But we'll talk about that later in the week. Thank you, as always, everybody, for listening. Thank you, gents, for joining me as well. We'll speak to you later in the week. Goodbye.